How are you?
Vacation last week.
I was sitting on a lake with my kids, probably letting them drown a little too much for their own good, but hey, you got to sink or swim.
Nice. I took a little trip last week too. I did some kayak camping on the Wisconsin River, and it was
Kayak camping. So if I
yep,
understand it, you pack all your stuff on a kayak and you camp out of it.
yep.
Things I'll never do for 1,000, Eric.
It was great. Sleeping on a sandbar in the middle of the river is some of the best sleep you'll have. Saw the Milky Way. It was awesome.
No, it's some of the best sleep you'll ever have.
Well, that's true. That's true. But then it started pouring, and we gave up and got a hotel room because we're old now, and then we get to do that. There's no reason to camp in pouring rain, and it's good we did actually. A couple news reports of people getting stranded on the river, so we bailed and still had a good trip.
Good.
But now we're back into it. You ready to talk about virtue signaling?
I'm ready to talk about it, but I think we should probably be a little more specific on which virtue signaling we're talking about today.
Oh, for sure. We're talking about corporate virtue signaling here. This has nothing to do with political virtue signaling or anything like that. We're talking about the things that companies do. And it seems to people who have been through this for a while, they're doing this in order to garner attention or PR because they think that it's part of the story of what good, cool, modern companies do, but they haven't really thought through all of the effects. So just as a couple of examples, and I'm sure you have some examples, and we'll probably get into a whole lot of different areas, but like probably the biggest thing that companies do to have this like corporate virtue signaling is the way that they care about their office, right? We have this office building, or we're renting a space in a cool part of town, a hip part of town. It's very important to us that we have an office space in some specific part of town. We deck out our office in some way. There's the ping pong tables and the beer kegs and the free lunch and the snacks and the bean bags and the quiet rooms and like all of these things that supposedly people want. But it's mostly just companies doing this to show that they get it somehow. So we got stuff like that. We also have policy virtue signaling, all of the policies that companies come up with in order to show that they're kind of cool and with it, the unlimited PTO, things like that. And we have the things that the company actually measures. So for all of the things that a company measures, there's a set of those that can fall within what we call vanity metrics. And sometimes companies get very proud of these vanity metrics, even though they're meaningless to the company's outcome. So let's just start there. I think we got the physical office space, we got policies, and we got vanity metrics. What have you seen in this space?
And all of those things I've seen, and you're talking about a little policy and metrics. It's fun in the marketing and sales world. We have all these great things that are virtue signaling, like, hey, look, we have this great President's Club, where, by the way, if you get in it, now we have to go on an awkward trip where we're going to be around all of our coworkers drinking too much in bathing suits, but it's a great time.
Right. And, okay. Yeah. So games in the workplace too.
Yeah, games, the contests, all of these things that are supposedly cultural great, but they don't really add value to either the employee, nor the clients, nor the company. And I think all of these virtual signalings came from a good place, and then people kind of use them to look better than they really were.
Right. We want to be seen as a good place to work. We want to be seen as a great company, doing the right things in the right place. We're here and we're going to change the world, right? That there's no bad intent behind any of these things. It's mostly that just as we've seen over the last decade of different companies trying this stuff out, it usually doesn't actually get you what you want.
Well, and they buy into the fad or the movement without understanding it. And it's, I'm going to say one of Ted Lasso's lines was "Be curious, not judgmental." And in this case, I think that the thing should be curious, don't implement. And being curious under the why these things have gained traction and why people value them. And let's first take the office space. Okay. And let's take the virtue signaling of putting up and spending money for an office that's in a hip part of town. Let's deck it out with ping pong tables and putt-putt, bean bags. Oh, and guess what? Here's a kegerator. And that's great if the intent is to actually have a benefit of life. This is where our employees are currently working. So this is where we're putting the office to reduce their transit. Great. That actually has value. But if you're doing it because look at our address, that doesn't have value.
Yeah, you actually just reminded me of something. I don't know if you remembered this, but a long time ago when we worked at a company and we were thinking about changing offices, we actually, I'm not sure if, I think you and I did this together. We sat down and put everybody's address on a Google map and found the center of everybody's commute. And we said, here is where we should have an office. And if you're picking an office way out here, you're lessening the quality of life for everybody.
Well, and I remember that was us, and me and you were both arguing if we're going to move offices, we may as well do it for the benefit of our employees.
Yeah.
And we looked at, hey, how do we reduce the travel time for as many of the people as possible that have to come into the office?
Yeah.
And I remember doing that exercise, and I remember running into people like, well, that's not a cool part of town. I'm like, well, this is where our people live. Who cares if it's cool? Let's add value.
Yep.
And I think that's the virtue signaling versus the root cause of it. I think when you're looking and you're in a startup stage and you're about to hire 100 people, if you're choosing an area based on this is where our ideal client profile for our new hires is, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
If you're doing it so that you get on the front page of the local software magazine, business journal, that's dumb.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it's funny because in our situation, I think we felt like we did a pretty good analysis and gave a good recommendation for the area we should look in. We went and looked at some offices; they were cheaper than the area that we were currently in. It was all thumbs up. However, the outcome of this situation was the company decided to virtue signal and stay in a big fancy research park and wanting to have that address or whatever, and it. That's the decision that the company made. That's a weird thing to do when we're looking at it unemotionally, aemotionally, from the outside. It's a weird thing to do to say that this address is somehow prestigious or it provides us some value in some way versus less expensive office space closer to where our employees live, lower commutes. Right. It seems obvious that it would have been better to do that, but companies often get stuck in this, like the intangible things somehow become so important.
Well, and I think the issue there is a lot of the people that were influential in that decision were afraid of making a mistake as opposed to putting this is what makes sense. And because a lot of times the people that are involved in making a decision don't really do the work of finding the stakeholder value and where the value stream is, specifically, whether it's offices, whether it's how you decorate the office, whether it's how you position the work environment. Mm-hmm. And this is something that you and I have a huge philosophy on, which is when you're making a decision, go as close to the work as possible. And I don't know, I can't think of what it's called in Scrum, but you're talking about the Gemba and Lean. And the idea is when you want to make a decision, get as close to how the work is being done as possible, and then make the decision based on that. And there's where we talk about virtue signaling. Let's talk about another one. Let's talk about office competitions. And a huge thing in sales is how do you design spiffs or competitions or games?
What is a spiff? That's actually a term I haven't heard.
Okay, so spiffs in sales is like, hey, we're going to do this 2 or 4 week competition. It's a 30-day competition to see who can do this. And oftentimes it's who can make the most calls in this 2-week span, who can close the most deals in this month, who gets, some type of metric that is tied to a specific, and I forgot even what spiff stands for, by the way. But we're going to do a small energized competition. And what the proponents of this would tell you is it allows people to get their compensation faster. So at the end of it, they can win a raffle ticket that gives them this prize, or they can get an extra $200 bonus or something like that.
Okay.
And there's by the way, there's consultant firms that are aimed at creating spiffs and games and competitions for your sales team. Now, it does, again, this is one of those ones that started in a good place, which is we want to bring the reward as close to the action as possible and create milestones.
I'm with you so far. How does this go wrong, though?
Where it goes wrong is we now spend so much time creating the vanity metric that we're all running towards. And oftentimes they come with discounts to close deals because we want to close this deal faster. We're going to offer discounts to close these deals. It came because, and you and I have talked about this, it goes wrong because the metric that they chose isn't under complete control of the salesperson.
Mm.
And it doesn't have a direct line to value. So
so they're going to do whatever they can do in their power to win.
Yeah, and you know this as well as I do. When employees are based on a metric that they don't have complete control over, they either distort the system or they distort the numbers.
Yep.
If they don't have control of the system,
there is no other option. Yep, there is no other option.
So we and I kid you not, I've seen this. People always say, well, they can't distort their sales activities. So they're, if we're measuring how many calls they go out, and I'm like, bullshit, they can't. Every salesperson I know that was involved in these inside sales competitions had a list of about 20 numbers that they could call that they knew were going to voicemail.
Oh my gosh, that's dark.
But hold on. And everyone blames, well, that employee doesn't have integrity. And I'm like, well, this is why these systems create these activities.
Yeah.
And when you create that system, and this is the only way, and you're putting a prize at the end of it, and oh, by the way, it's not only that there's a prize, we're going to embarrass the lower 30 people. Well, me as a salesperson, I know that the volume of activity is only one metric here. If I get a good sale on the hook, if I get an engaged prospect, I have to spend more time with that prospect.
Yeah.
Now I'm spending that time with the prospect, but at the end of the week, I'm going to get yelled at for not calling more people. So now I have these 20 numbers to get my numbers back to where they should be.
It sounds like you're optimizing for a part and not the whole.
That's exactly right. And here's the part that scares me even more is how much time the leadership spends creating these games.
Oh, for sure.
And managing those games and then celebrating those games. And think about if I spent those hours, instead of coming up with stupid games to play every month, if I took those hours and spent it on improving the lives of my employees.
The whole reward thing and game thing always gets me because there's some basic human psychology and behavioral economics at play that we could use to our advantage to design a better game. But it doesn't seem like companies do that very often. The structure of most corporate games is if you do this, then you'll get this thing at the end, and everybody knows it. And then there's unsaid things, right? Like if you do this, then you get this thing. Also, we're going to see how people are doing. And if you're at the bottom half, that's not going to look very good for you, right? Mm-hmm. So like there's a lot of other things that happen. A better way to structure a game is to actually give the reward up front and claw it back if they don't get it, right? We're going to give you $500 this month. And all we ask of you is to make 50 blind phone calls a week or whatever the game is that you want to set up. And if you don't do it, then it comes off your paycheck next month. Now that sounds weird. I know that it sounds weird. And I'm not advocating that we do this. What I am advocating for, though, is that all of the research shows that will actually get you the result that you want, not the other way around.
Yeah, because people by nature are more afraid of losing something they already have as opposed to getting something new. But
that's right.
Bringing this back to the idea of virtual signaling versus what you want. And this is when we talk games and spiffs, we very rarely are solving for the problem that's in front of us. Games and spiffs are solving for a motivational problem amongst your team. That's the only
or a systemic problem of the management system that they set up. Right.
Well,
if we can't get people to do X activity, it's because of the system that we've set up.
Yeah, so we're not, and that's where the being curious versus being judgmental. The root these games were created in an era where sales and marketing was very different. And by the way, the sales and marketing for startups versus mid-sized companies versus established companies, wildly different. Yeah. And when you're talking established companies, you're going to have these huge teams, and motivating those teams is difficult. Mm-hmm. The idea that you're going to motivate them is a whole nother question. But now they came up with these games to solve the problem of we have low employee engagement. And here's a way to put a carrot and a stick for employee engagement. But they never actually looked at the problem. Why do you have low employee engagement?
Oh, interesting.
And so that's where this virtual signaling that we're talking about here is it all comes down to the same thing: is what is the problem you're actually trying to solve, and what's the best way to solve for that problem.
Yeah.
And almost all of sales and marketing is still based on these large companies that use these methodologies, because those mid managers have now become senior managers at these smaller companies, but they're not doing the root cause of why those solutions were put in the first place. It's the same thing. Let's have some fun with this one. Virtual signaling on unlimited time off.
Well, policies in general, I think, have been a huge area of companies trying to say, "Hey, look at us. We're a good company. We care. We love our customers. We love our employees, and we are going to do all of the things that cool companies do." And the top of the pyramid for that is this idea of unlimited PTO,
Yep.
which is a really weird idea. And something that I've actually changed my mind on over the years. I think the idea of it is great, because the idea of it is simply, hey, look, we trust you to get your work done. You manage your own time. We're not going to have a super complicated accounting system for tracking what hours you're working and what hours you're not working. We completely understand that work does not take place between 8 and 5, that you can work outside of those hours, that you're thinking about problems at those hours. Sometimes you're putting in a long day to really focus and crack through a problem, and sometimes you're putting in a short day when you just can't get anything going that day. Great. Let's just say that. Because as soon as we say something like, therefore, we're going to give you unlimited PTO, there's something that just doesn't quite mesh. As soon as we start asking questions about it, it doesn't quite make sense, right? Unlimited PTO. So I'm going to take the next 2 years off to raise my newborn child. Is that okay? I mean, it's unlimited PTO, right? And as soon as somebody says, well, I'm not really sure that that's how the policy is supposed to be used, then, oh, okay, so there are limits. There are limits, right? So perhaps what we should do, in the spirit of unlimited PTO, perhaps and I know I'm talking a lot here because I love this one, and you can go next. But in the spirit of unlimited PTO, perhaps we should just give people more PTO. Perhaps we should even kind of reverse the strategy and say, we have mandatory PTO. You must take at least one consecutive week off every calendar year, and we're going to shut off your access to email.
Well,
right?
yeah,
like there's things that
we're solving for the wrong end of the problem here again, though.
Okay,
this is where I think you and I have complete agreement on. The structure is more important than the virtue signaling.
Yeah.
And what problem are we trying to solve for with any PTO? We're the problem,
burnout, retention. Yeah.
We're trying to make, and here's my point of PTO is always like, we are trying to create work-life flow.
Yeah.
I don't want to call it balance, because I hate that term, because work is part of life. So you're trying to create a flow for your employees that keeps them engaged, as productive. And to do that, you want them happy and pride about their work. So whenever I've managed PTO, because I use the term loosely because I don't manage PTO and I never will, and I refuse to do it, because the idea is, what I'm truly trying to manage is the state and the satisfaction, the employee engagement, and PTO is a tool for that.
Mm.
And so there have been times where I have told people exactly like you did, hey, look, you're at burnout. I can see it. You're off. We will handle these problems for you. But now when we talk about the structure of unlimited PTO and how that, and I do like your term getting away from unlimited PTO and say it's unmanaged PTO, but there's a whole lot that we can talk about there. I look at PTO as a tool to support my team. And when you're talking about the structure and all of that has to go into play, first of all, you have to have a structure that work doesn't pile up when people take PTO. Because as any consultant knows, or anybody that has a leadership position knows, I go away for a week and I'm working 60 hours the week before and 60 hours the week after. So it just adds to my stress as I watch my emails pop up. So you need a structure that says that doesn't happen. Yep. 2, you need a team that can communicate and can hyper communicate of, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a good time to take PTO because of these things. Instead, let's do this. And support each other in that fashion, which says, okay, I can still plan for family vacations. I can still plan for individual escapes. And we know when we need mental health days. We know that there's days where you walk into the office and you just don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay for somebody to raise their hand and say, hey, I can't do this today.
Yeah.
And you need the structure to support those things. So whether, and this is where virtual signaling, unlimited PTO was a way to tackle the mental health and burnout issue. Except for if you don't have the structure to support those things, you're not tackling that at all. You're just deferring it.
Right.
I know, development uses tech debt. Well, you have PTO debt when you take time off in these individual sports. And I use individual sports for sales, marketing, or if you're a small development team. So you need to build that structure that says this debt doesn't pile up on your PTO.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's where, go ahead.
No, I was going to switch subjects. Finish.
Go ahead. Let's switch.
Okay. Another policy thing that I've seen coming up more and more is this kind of line item on the company. It's usually on like a job advertisements, a job posting, and in the company handbook about company paid dinners and transportation home. And it's sounds nice, but there's always a little asterisk there, and it says something like, for people who stay at the office past 8 p.m. And at that point, it's like, oh, okay, well, I see, like, maybe you want me to get home safely, and getting an Uber, whatever, is better than walking home in the dark, and you're going to feed me a meal if I'm there at 8 p.m. But it's another kind of a signal, I guess, where it's like the company's trying to look like we're cool. Like, hey, look, we will get you a car home and a meal. That's what we do. We're such a good company. We care about you. But we're only doing it if you stay at the office until 8 p.m. So that's another kind of like, okay, there's a huge mismatch there between what you're signaling to the outside world and what you're actually doing for your employees.
And I think this is interesting because now we're tapping across a lot of these issues. So the first one being structure and systems. How do you actually support your team to get the most pride, the most valuable, and the most engaged workforce? And how do you support the team in their life to do that? Now you have we know, quote unquote, shit's happening. How do we support you in those moments where we asked more of you? And in doing that, you're talking about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Oh, you get a free ride and a meal if you stay late, as opposed to the manager looking and saying, holy shit, you're burning yourself out. How can I make sure you're safe and stable? And
yeah,
the answer to me is almost invariably empowering every employee to do what's in the best interest of the employee and the company at the same time.
Yes. And if you don't have that level of trust, or you don't feel like you have that level of trust, that's the issue that you should be working on. Or to make it simpler, the thing that you could do is just empower every manager to make those decisions, right? Give the managers some sort of budget to support the health and well-being of their employees. And if that means that we get an Uber for people who stay late, or we tell people to go home on a Friday, or like whatever it is, have the manager have some sort of ability to craft what is best for their team.
Now let's talk about the structure that supports that, because as you and I both firmly believe that structure feeds culture, and culture doesn't eat anything for breakfast. And the idea here, though, is the structure. You don't want this to be a runaway train and everyone's going to say, oh, wait, you're going to give the managers that freedom. They're going to take advantage of it. Stop.
Then that's the problem.
and I agree. If you don't, you need to start treating people like adults and who have pride in their work. You demand pride in their work, but then you treat them like they don't have it, and you're pissed off they don't have it.
Yeah. And
so the structure of this, and you and I both believe in these idea of sprints and retrospectives. Well, guess what? You made this decision. Let's all come back. Let's have a manager's session where everyone can be like, hey, look, my team was getting burnt out. This is the way I tried to help them. This is where it worked. This is where it didn't. And guess what? It's not about judging you. It's not about evaluating you. You're not going to get punished for it. What we're going to say is, did it work? It served this purpose, but it hurt here. How do we adjust going forward? And so the answer here is not worrying about trusting them or not. It's about creating feedback loops so everyone can improve. Because Erik, you were sitting at the office late with your team. You noticed this. You got them an Uber and a dinner. Awesome. I'm sitting there late with my team. I noticed that. I didn't do shit, but I just learned from you. Oh man, I wish I thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
Or I went and got you a limo, and everyone's like, wait a minute. The limo's probably a little excessive. You could have solved for that problem in a different way.
Not for me though, right? I deserve a limo.
Erik, I don't think they would let you in the limo.
They wouldn't.
But and there's and I think you and I come down on this, the smaller batch tests that you can perform and the faster you can have feedback loops, the earlier you will solve for these problems.
Yeah.
And the key thing is understanding what the problem you're solving for is.
That's right.
So,
hey, look, I really wanted to talk about vanity metrics, but maybe that's its own chat. We're at 26 minutes already. Let's wrap this up and do vanity metrics as its own chat next week.
I agree. The wrap up is simple. Don't do stupid things for stupid reasons. You'll win stupid prizes.
And think about these things. Don't look at what other companies are doing and try to copy paste into your company. Actually sit down and have a conversation and think through. Try to think of all of the things that would go wrong with this, right? If we implement a policy of X, how could this destroy our company? That is a good question to ask and brainstorm about, so that perhaps you're not just copy and pasting a policy that sounds cool, but you're crafting it to work for your organization.
And I think the risk management aspect there is fine. I think asking yourself, what problem are we trying to solve for with this? Is it a recruiting problem? If it's a recruiting problem, why are you struggling to recruit? And is this an employee engagement problem? Why are we struggling to have employees engaged? So that I think the risk management is great and necessary, as well as what problem are we solving for with this policy? What problem are we solving for with this decision? So we started with the real estate question of where the office is located. What problem are we solving with this address?
Yeah.
And that to me is the question that doesn't get asked nearly enough, is what problem are we solving?
Yeah. That question doesn't get asked enough in any part of any organization.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay, so we have a topic for next week, vanity metrics. Maybe we have another topic here where we should talk about that question, like what problem are we solving and how important that question is, and if we should kind of nail that down before we go forward with other things.
I like it.
Okay. Nice talking to you. Glad we both got some unlimited PTO last week.
You have unlimited PTO? My company doesn't offer that shit.
Well, my boss is really harsh and actually gives me no PTO. But okay. We'll talk to you next week. It was nice seeing you again.